Have you ever wondered why a bird doesn't need a visa to fly across the ocean, and a wolf doesn't require a passport stamp to cross the forest border? Look at your legs. Evolution, or nature if you prefer, created them for one single purpose: movement. This is your basic biological function. You were created to walk, run, explore territory, seek resources, and change habitats. This right is inscribed in your DNA, in your anatomy, in every contraction of your muscles. But try today to walk in a straight line at least 620 miles. What will happen? Very soon you'll run into a fence, a booth with an armed person, or an invisible line on the map, crossing which, without a special piece of paper, will make you a criminal. You don't even notice how you pay for this. You consider it the norm. We're used to thinking that it's for our benefit, for our safety, for protection from chaos. But at what moment did we give up this right?
Who decided that you must ask for permission just to move your physical body from point A to point B on a planet that theoretically belongs to all of us equally? They don't teach this in school, and the news doesn't talk about it. But if we cast aside the habitual veil and look at the facts with the dry, cold gaze of an investigator, a picture of grand deception will open before us. We live in a reality where freedom of movement is not a right, but a privilege that they sell us on lease. And the scariest thing is not that borders exist. The scariest thing is how masterfully they've convinced us that we won't survive without a collar. Today, I begin an investigation into how humanity was put on a chain. Not an iron one, but a bureaucratic one. We'll break down how the free world turned into a restricted area, and you'll see that this cage was built right under our noses while we slept. Let's conduct a thought experiment. Imagine the world of the late 19th century. It wasn't that long ago, just 3 or 4 generations back. Your great-grandfathers lived in a completely different reality. If you had told a person back then that to travel from Paris to London, or from Vienna to New York, he would need to go through a humiliating interrogation procedure, submit fingerprints, show proof of income, and get a special sticker in a little book, he would have looked at you like you were crazy. The official version of history delicately omits this. But before the beginning of the 20th century, passports in their modern sense were practically not used for peaceful citizens in most civilized countries. People simply boarded a train or a ship and went. The world was open. Yes, there were difficulties, there was logistics, but there was no total system of filtering people like cattle. You can find memoirs of writers and travelers from that era who, with amazement, described the introduction of the first strict border controls as something barbaric, temporary, and utterly unthinkable for a free person. Stefan Zweig, describing the world of yesterday, spoke of a time when borders were merely symbolic lines. But then something changed. As if by the flick of an invisible switch, the world began to close. And this didn't happen spontaneously. If you start comparing dates, your hair will stand on end. In different corners of the world, in countries with different political regimes, laws restricting movement begin to be introduced almost synchronously. We're told that this was a consequence of the world wars, that these were forced security measures. This is the classic lie used to cover any tightening of the screws. Temporary measures. Remember that phrase. Nothing is more permanent than government temporary measures. The passport system, introduced as an emergency necessity during the global conflict of 1914, was not abolished when the guns fell silent. On the contrary, it became stricter. It became the foundation of a new reality. Why? Because the war ended, but the control mechanism proved too sweet to give up. Look at the word itself. Passport. Break it down into parts. Pass and port. Passage through the port.
Originally, it was a document for cargo, for ships, for goods. By applying this term to a person, the system unambiguously hints at your status. You are not a rights-bearing subject. You are a movable object, an inventory unit, cargo that must be accounted for, weighed, and paid for. The moment the human right to walk the earth was replaced with a document permitting passage through a port, a fundamental substitution of concepts occurred. We were transferred from the status of planet inhabitants to the status of service personnel assigned to a specific barracks. Do you think I'm painting it too darkly? Then answer a simple question. Why do you have to pay the state a fee for issuing a document that confirms that you are you? Does your existence require paid proof? Think about the absurdity of the situation. You were born, that's a fact. But for the system, you don't exist until you get a paper with a number, and that paper doesn't belong to you. Open your passport. There, usually on the last page, in small print, it says that this document is the property of the state. You are just the holder. You carry in your pocket someone else's thing that gives you the right to be walked. Watch the hands. The trick is not to prohibit you from leaving. The trick is to make leaving a service. In the 19th century, travel was a matter of money for a ticket. In the 20th century, it became a matter of loyalty to the system.
If you behave well, if you pay taxes, if you're not on blacklists, if you got the jab they told you to, and checked in where they ordered, they'll open the gate for you. This is training. The classic Pavlovian scheme transferred to society. The right to movement became the currency they pay you with for obedience. The deeper I dug, the scarier the picture became. I began studying legislative acts from the beginning of the 20th century and discovered an amazing synchronicity. As if different governments, which publicly feuded with each other, behind the scenes were reading the same playbook. The introduction of visa regimes, the creation of customs zones, the emergence of the concept of illegal immigrant. All this sprang up like mushrooms after rain, precisely when technological progress allowed people to move faster. As soon as humanity invented fast trains, cars, and airplanes, the system immediately built cages. This can't be a coincidence. It's a reaction. The elite's fear of the masses' mobility. If a person can move freely, he is independent. He can leave from where it's bad to where it's good. He can escape the tyrant, the predatory taxes, the hunger. Free migration is the main market mechanism regulating the quality of governance. If the ruler is bad, people leave. But if you put up a fence and introduce exit visas, or make entry into other countries impossible without approval from above, then competition disappears. People turn into serfs, tied to the land not by feudal right, but by bureaucratic impossibility of legal existence outside the assigned zone. We're used to thinking that progress brings freedom. They gave us the internet, smartphones, airplanes. But in fact, physical freedom of the body has been shrinking with each decade. In the 19th century, you didn't have a smartphone, but you could go wherever your eyes led. Today, you have all the world's information in your pocket. But you can't board a plane without retina scanning and a search like a particularly dangerous criminal. We traded real freedom for a digital illusion and the comfort of the cage. And this is only the first layer of the lie. What hides beneath it concerns not just borders between countries. It concerns borders within your cities and even within your consciousness. Have you ever wondered why the car became the symbol of freedom in the 20th century? Advertising for decades sold us the image: open road, wind in the hair, horizon, and no restrictions. But let's take off the glasses put on by marketers and look at the car through the eyes of the control system. What is a car really? It's an iron cage on wheels with a unique identification number which moves along strictly designated corridors, obeying thousands of rules, under the watch of cameras and radars. It's the ideal surveillance device, which you buy with your own money, and fuel with gas, taxes from which go to maintaining the very structure that restricts you. Paradox, isn't it? They've convinced us that personal transport is the pinnacle of autonomy. But it was precisely with the mass introduction of cars, not with the appearance of borders, that the real trap snapped shut. Let's go back a bit. Before the era of engines, when a person traveled on horseback or in a cart, he didn't need government permission to operate. No one issued rights to ride horseback. Roads were common property, means of communication created by the feet and wheels of travelers over centuries. There existed so-called common law. You could move everywhere as long as you didn't violate private property boundaries. But with the advent of internal combustion engines, a brilliant substitution of concepts occurred, which lawyers call the conversion of right into privilege. Note, I'm not talking about technical safety rules. I'm talking about the legal foundation. In the 20s and 30s of the last century, practically in all developed countries, driver's licenses began to be introduced synchronously. We're told it's for safety, since the car is a source of increased danger. Sounds logical? But if you start reading the texts of laws from that time, you'll discover a strange thing. Initially, licensing concerned only commercial transportations. The word driver or operator in the legal sense meant a person engaged in carriage for money. It was a professional activity subject to regulation. An ordinary person driving on his own business was called a traveler and was not subject to these norms. However, gradually, step by step, through court precedents and amendments written in complex bureaucratic language, the concept of commercial exploitation was stretched over private life. A linguistic sabotage occurred. The word transport, movement of goods, replaced the word travel. The word driver replaced traveler. And now every person who gets behind the wheel to go buy bread is legally equated to a merchant using state infrastructure for profit. And if so, a license is needed. And a license is not a right. It's a permission. And permission can be revoked. Do you feel the difference? A right you have by birth. Permission is issued to you by a bureaucrat. From that moment, you're on the hook. The system got a lever of pressure. Behave badly, don't pay fines, don't agree with the rules, and we'll take away your ability to move. In a world rebuilt for cars, where sidewalks along highways disappeared and distances became huge, license revocation is tantamount to house arrest. Cities and suburbs were specially designed so that you couldn't survive without wheels. This is called infrastructure coercion. You've been driven into conditions where being a pedestrian means being an outcast, and being a driver means being an eternal donor and supervised. Look at the dates. The Road Traffic Act in Britain in 1930, the introduction of mandatory licenses in Germany under the Nazis, the unification of rules in the US in the same years. This happened everywhere, as if according to a single script. During this period, states realized that the road is not just a path, it's an artery of power. He who controls the road controls the population. A vehicle registration system was created. Why register your property in a state database? You don't register your fridge or sofa. We're told to fight theft. But theft detection statistics are laughable. The real goal of registration is linking the object to the subject, creating a database of assets. The car became the first mass property that is transparent to the tax authorities and police. Along with this, a fine system was introduced.
This is a brilliant economic model. Rules were created that are impossible not to violate. Try driving through a modern metropolis without violating a single traffic rule point, without exceeding the speed by even 1 mile per hour, without crossing a solid line erased by rain. This is practically impossible. The system is built so that every participant in traffic is potentially guilty. This creates a presumption of guilt. The camera records the violation, and you receive a happy letter. You don't need to prove guilt in court. The presumption of innocence is disabled here. You must prove that you're not a camel. Thus, freedom of movement turned into an endless source of income for the budget and private companies servicing the cameras. But this is not yet the bottom. The scariest thing happened when this logic was transferred from cars to people themselves. Have you noticed how in recent years the word passenger became the main definition of a person in transport? In the subway, in the bus, in the train, you're a passenger. You're an object of transportation. They search you. They X-ray you. Metal detector arches at stations didn't appear immediately. First, it was only in airports, as an exceptional measure. Then, at train stations. Now, in schools and shopping centers. The border, which used to be a line on the map, is now at the entrance to the subway. You pass through border control every day just to get to work. This is the system trap. It didn't snap shut in one day. It was built over decades. First, they said control is needed at country borders. We agreed. Then they said control is needed on roads for cars. We nodded. Then they said control is needed at transport entrances. We stayed silent. Now, cameras with facial recognition hang on every building entrance. Your face became your transit pass and your case number simultaneously. You're no longer anonymous in the city crowd. The concept of private life in public space has been destroyed. In the 19th century, you could melt into London or Petersburg, and no one except the concierge knew where you were. Today, your route is a digital trail stored on servers forever. We have witnessed the death of anonymity, and without anonymity, there is no freedom. If Big Brother knows where you are every second of time, he can predict your behavior, manage your routes, and block your access. Recall recent events in the world when the QR code became a pass to a restaurant or bus. That wasn't a medical experiment. It was a test of access control infrastructure. The system checked. Are people ready to accept that their right to enter a room depends on the color of the lamp on their smartphone screen? And humanity answered, yes, ready. The mechanism is fine-tuned. Roads became paid corridors. Transport became a screening zone. The personal car became a tracking beacon. But for complete control, one element was missing. An economic leash that wouldn't even let you think about straying from the route. After all, as long as you have cash, you can still buy a ticket incognito or fuel up at a remote gas station. To make the cage perfect, they had to eliminate the possibility of anonymous payment for movement. Follow the money. This golden rule of any investigation never fails. If previously we talked about legal and administrative cages, now it's time to expose the most powerful control mechanism: economic. Do you think you're paying for gas or a train ticket? No. You're paying a tax for existing in space. The entire modern economic model is built to make your movement as expensive as possible and dependent on intermediaries. Look at the history of transport development, not as an engineer, but as an accountant. You'll see that freedom of movement was monetized down to the last inch,
and the citizen turned into an eternal debtor. Let's start with the fundamental substitution that occurred in the mid-20th century. It was the time when cities began to be massively rebuilt. In the US, Europe, and later in Asia, the concept of zoning was adopted. Residential areas were separated from business centers and industrial zones by huge distances. This was presented as care for health. Live in quiet, work in noise. But in reality, it created an artificial need for daily commuter migration. A person could no longer walk to work. He was forced to buy a car or use public transport. An infrastructure trap was created. Without transport, you're cut off from the economy. You can't earn bread. And here, banks and corporations take the stage. A car is an expensive thing. To buy freedom, a car, a person must go into debt. The auto loan industry emerged. Think about the cynicism of the scheme. You take a loan to buy a car, to drive to work, to pay off the loan. It's a closed loop, a perfect hamster wheel. The system got a lever of pressure. Lose your job, we'll take the car. Take the car, you won't find a new job. Your status as a mobile person became hostage to your financial discipline. But one loan isn't enough for the system. The concept of mandatory insurance is introduced. Let's break this down from a legal perspective. The state, which is obliged to maintain order on the roads with your taxes, suddenly declares, "We can't cope, so you must enter into a contract with a private commercial firm." Mandatory auto insurance is a unique precedent where the law forces a citizen to buy a product from a private entity. It's a tax that goes not to the budget, but into corporations' pockets. If you don't pay the private firm, the state will prohibit you from using your own property. This is the merger of power and capital, which was warned about as early as the beginning of the last century. More to come. Toll roads. We build roads with our taxes. But then the government hands these roads over to private concessionaires or state corporations, which set up toll booths. You pay twice. First, when you give taxes from your salary, and second, when you drive on the asphalt you've already paid for. This is a brilliant money extraction scheme. Moreover, alternative free routes are often deliberately brought to a state of unusability or artificially slowed by traffic lights and restrictions to herd you onto the toll highway. This is economic coercion. But the most terrifying blow to freedom is being dealt now. And you hardly notice it because it's wrapped in a pretty packaging of ecology and comfort. I'm talking about restricted access zones. In London, Milan, New York, and dozens of other megacities, fees for entering the centre or certain districts are introduced. This is called fighting traffic jams or emissions. But in fact, it's creating a property census for movement. If you're rich, you pay and go. If you're poor, you stand at the district border. Cities are becoming feudal fortresses again, where the center is for patricians and the outskirts for plebeians. The right to the city is now for sale. Look at the introduction dates of these zones. Early 2000s, then a sharp acceleration after 2010. Synchronously around the world. This is no coincidence. This is testing a new model. Pay as you go. The elites are preparing us for the fact that owning personal transport will become an unaffordable luxury. They're nudging us toward car sharing and taxis. At first glance, convenient. But what does this mean strategically? It means you don't have your own chariot. You depend on the platform. Today, the app allows you to take a car. Tomorrow, your social score drops, or there's not enough money on your card, or you get digitally banned, and you're going nowhere. Lack of ownership is lack of independence. And now recall aviation. Once upon a time, you could buy a plane ticket for cash at the counter, just giving your last name. Today, buying a ticket is a full identification procedure that goes through banking systems.
It's impossible to buy a ticket anonymously. It's impossible to fly without a digital trail. The financial system has merged with the security system. Account blocking now means an automatic ban on movement. If your cards are blocked, you're chained to the spot. You can't buy gas, a train ticket, pay for a toll road. Cash is being systematically phased out, not because it's convenient, but because cash is the last loophole for uncontrolled movement. We see the circle closing. The economy has become a tool of retention. They've made us believe that freedom is a service that must be bought, a service provided by subscription. Have you noticed how car manufacturers have started introducing subscriptions for car features? Want the seat heater or navigator to work? Pay monthly. Soon, and this is not science fiction but patents already registered, the car simply won't start or go to a certain zone if you haven't made the payment, or if the central server decides you can't go there. This is no longer just control. This is herd management through access to resources. Before, to stop a person, you had to build a wall and post a soldier. That was expensive and inefficient. Today, it's enough to change a couple of digits in a bank code or a traffic management algorithm. The person will stay put, convinced it's just a technical glitch or new rates. We built this prison ourselves, paying for every brick with our taxes and fees. But the scariest part will begin when this system decides we're consuming too many resources for our movement. We've come to the very edge of the rabbit hole. If before we talked about how the system was built, now we'll see how it snapped shut. The trap didn't spring when they installed the cameras, but when we voluntarily agreed to replace physical reality with a digital simulation. The final act of this drama is unfolding right now, before our eyes, and its scale boggles the imagination. This is not just control. It's a complete reprogramming of the very concept of human life. At the center of this process is the concept of the smart city and the so-called Internet of Things. It sounds harmless and progressive, but let's translate this into the language of facts. The Internet of Things is a network in which every item, from your refrigerator to your car, is connected to a single control system. Now look at the modern auto industry. Why are governments so aggressively, up to direct bans and draconian taxes, squeezing out old gas cars and promoting electric vehicles? They're telling us about ecology, but any engineer will tell you that the carbon footprint from battery production is colossal. It's not about the climate. It's about the control architecture. An old diesel Jeep is an autonomous fortress. It can be fueled from a barrel, fixed with a sledgehammer, and it will go wherever you turn the wheel. It has no brains connected to a corporation server. It can't be controlled from outside. A modern electric vehicle is a gadget on wheels. It's a smartphone you can sit on. It constantly updates its software, and in the user agreement that no one reads, it's stipulated that the manufacturer has the right to remotely restrict functionality. Technologies already exist, and they are enshrined in legislation in a number of countries under the guise of fighting drunk driving, which allow the police or manufacturer to remotely shut down your car's engine. This is called kill switch, emergency switch. Imagine, you're driving, the system recognizes that your social score has been lowered, or you're entering a zone closed for visits due to quarantine or protests. Your car simply smoothly stops and locks the doors until the patrol arrives. You're no longer a driver. You're cargo in a controlled capsule. This brings us to the concept of the 15-minute city. Marketers sell it to us as paradise, where everything necessary is within walking distance. Store, school, work, all nearby. Why do you need a car? Why go to the other end of the city? But this medal has a reverse side. In Britain and other European countries,
They are already testing systems where the city is divided into sectors, and travel between them by personal transport is limited to a certain number of times per year. Exceed the limit, pay a huge fine. This is not care for convenience. This is a digital ghetto. They're training you to live in cells. You're a bee that must bring honey in its sector and not fly to the neighboring hive without the queen's permission. And here, the scariest element comes into play. The Central Bank Digital Currency, CBDC.
This is not cryptocurrency, as many think. This is programmable money. Unlike cash, which is anonymous and free, the digital ruble, dollar, or euro has a code in which spending conditions can be programmed. If the system decides to restrict your mobility, your money simply stops working at gas stations or ticket offices beyond a 3-mile radius from your home. You don't need to ban leaving by law. They just disable your ability to pay for that departure. Technically, you're free, go on foot, but practically, you're paralyzed. This is the reset. Man is being turned from a rights-bearing subject into an object of administration, into a resource. The new oil is data about your behavior. The system knows where you're going, at what speed, whom you're meeting, and if your route doesn't match the algorithm, you're cut off. We're seeing how rapidly the human capacity for autonomous survival is degrading. The generation raised with navigators can't orient itself in the terrain. If GPS is shut off tomorrow, millions of people will be helpless, like blind kittens. We've lost repair skills, map reading skills, physical endurance skills. We've become fully dependent on infrastructure we don't own. Recall the pandemic. It was the dress rehearsal. The whole world saw how easily, with a snap of the fingers, the planet can be stopped. Close borders, cancel flights, introduce QR codes for leaving your building. And the scariest part? People didn't rebel. People got scared and asked for even more control for safety. The system realized the mechanism works. Fear is the best jailer. Now that the test run is complete, the screws will be tightened under the pretext of climate crisis. They'll tell you, you can't fly on vacation because you've exhausted your carbon limit for this year. Your right to movement will be tied to your ecological usefulness. This is the end of the era of travel.
We're returning to a new Middle Ages, only instead of fortress walls, invisible digital barriers, and instead of the feudal lord, artificial intelligence distributing life quotas. You're no longer masters of the land, you're renters of space. And the rental agreement can be terminated at any moment unilaterally. The cage has snapped shut. We're inside. The walls are transparent, but you can't headbutt through them anymore. One question remains. Will we realize this, or keep considering it progress? We've reached the finale, and if you've been listening carefully, you should now feel not fear, but a cold, piercing realization. We live in a facade. What we are used to calling reality is actually a meticulously constructed amusement park, where routes are pre-planned and exits are closed for technical maintenance. The biggest lie we've been made to believe is that all these restrictions, cameras, passports, checkpoints, codes, and zones are temporary inconveniences, the price of progress, or necessary protection from enemies. No. This is the new normal. This is humanity's new operating system, where the concept of free will is recognized as an outdated bug that needs to be fixed with a firmware update. Look at the situation from a bird's eye view. That same bird which, unlike us, doesn't need a QR code to fly. We see the world turning into a global logistics warehouse. There can't be chaos in a warehouse. In a warehouse, every item must stay on its shelf. If an item starts moving on its own, it's a system glitch. You are that item.
Your value to the system lies only in your predictability. If you stay home, consume content, order food, and work remotely, you're an ideal unit. You generate data, you spend money, and you create no risks.
But as soon as you step out the door, you become a variable that needs tracking. That's why the right to be walked becomes the most expensive service on civilization's price list. Think about why the elites are so obsessed with the idea of security. They're telling us it's for us, so we won't be robbed, infected, or offended. But in reality, total security is a synonym for total control. It's impossible to make your life absolutely safe without turning it into a prison cell. Solitary confinement is also very safe. No cars to hit you, no viruses, no thugs, just walls and guards. We've collectively agreed to this deal. We handed over the keys to our freedom in exchange for the promise that nothing bad will happen to us. And now, with the cage snapped shut, we're surprised to discover that no one intends to give the keys back. The philosophical punch of this story is that we weren't conquered by aliens or enslaved by AI from the future. We did it ourselves. We, the generation of comfort, built the walls of our own prison, paying for every brick through taxes, insurances, and subscriptions. We traded the risk of living life for the guarantee of existence. We gave up the right to be masters of the land for the right to be users of services. And now, as the system transitions to the phase of active resource management, we face the fact. We are not the bosses here. We are staff servicing the infrastructure, or, even worse, extra mouths consuming too much carbon for our movement. Look at the trend. The physical world is becoming a luxury. Real travel, real food, real meetings. These are now privileges of the rich. For the rest, metaverse, VR goggles, and drone delivery. Why go to Paris if you can put on a helmet and stroll through a digital copy? Why fly to the ocean if the screen delivers 8K imagery? We're gently but insistently being pushed from physical reality into digital simulation. Because in the digital, we take up no space, consume no resources, and are fully controllable. In the virtual world, pressing the Deny Access button is even easier than setting up a roadblock. This is the great reset of the relationship between man and space. The Earth is no longer our common home. It has become private territory of corporations and states, where we exist as temporary tenants. And like any landlord, the system can at any moment change the rules of residence, raise the rent, or evict an undesirable tenant altogether. Biometrics has become our irremovable collar. Before, you could throw away your passport and become another person. You can't throw away your face, retina, or fingerprint. You're marked from birth to death. But is there a way out? Or are we doomed? The answer lies not in riots or destroying cameras. The answer is in the mind. The system holds on our consent, on our belief that without permission, from above, we'll perish. The first step to freedom is always realizing that you're in captivity. As long as we think electronic passes are convenient and toll roads are normal, we'll sit in the cage. The exit is where the entrance is, in our consciousness. We must stop asking for permission to live. We must remember that the right to breathe, walk, and look at the sun is given to us not by a ministry or corporation, but by the fact of our birth. We live in an era when the simple act of walking without a phone in your pocket becomes an act of civil disobedience. When paying with cash becomes a revolutionary gesture. When refusing digital convenience for physical anonymity is the only way to preserve yourself. History teaches us that any totalitarian control eventually collapses under its own weight because it contradicts human nature. Man is movement. Life is expansion, and no algorithms can indefinitely restrain this flow. The question is only what price we will pay before we remember who we really are.
We have examined the mechanism that was built over centuries. From the first passports to digital currencies, from toll booths to smart cities, the puzzle has come together. Now you see the picture in full. You see the bars that previously seemed like a wallpaper pattern. And now, since you know this, you can no longer pretend to be asleep. Knowledge is an irreversible process. You are no longer a passenger. You are a witness.